current beef price, one of the things to note about that is that price is for the most conventional feedlot ground beef that you can get. I'm not seeing anything in the near future that's going to change on the beef situation. The only thing that I can see would be some sort of a recessionary environment that leads to lower demand. Because at some point, you would think that the market can only go so high before it crushes the demand.
Because if you're going to get an airline fuel surcharge because, oh, suddenly the price of oil spiked $20 by the time you bought your ticket and it costs us more to get that plane in the air, are we going to be able to do the same thing with prices in food? Like you go into the supermarket and they're like, slap a sticker on, it's 10% more today just because we had a food surcharge or something.
Well, yeah, and then you're talking about input costs that skyrocket. That becomes unsustainable for, again, one man operation, smaller homesteads. You're self funding, you have no government backing you up, there's no government assistance, there's no federal programs, there's no crop insurance, there's none of that. One of the things that's really important, whether you're doing backyard grows, stuff I'm doing is kind of the extent of what one man can do by himself. There's no silver bullet in any of these growing practices. The information you take in from the various YouTube channels, man, a lot of those are very viable, great systems, but there's not one solution for every problem, and everything's a compromise in our growing process and our growing practice. And so those are really good things to consider. For me in the area when I started growing 15 years ago, I would look at this information, look at this technique. Oh man, that's going to be my answer. You go and you do it and you just can't get it to replicate. And then as time goes on, you got some information and you mix it with experience, and then all of a sudden your equation equals knowledge. And that knowledge is born through that experience, and you start realizing there's no book written for where I live. I have to write the book myself. I have to build my own process. That process is built through time and through failure. And then you find this process that's repeatable. And then you have to respect that process. And then you have to just continually just hit that process over and over and trust it. And, most of my failures in crops, generally speaking, is where I try to cheat the process that's been proven through work and time. So all that to be said, folks that are trying to do their own grows, keep at it, use the information that you're getting in, but also take in the experience that you have, if you have any, and filter it through that for your particular area, for your particular situation. Especially when I talk to different people and about growing and trying to help them in some way, it's like I'm trying to understand exactly what their on the ground situation is and potential, because something that works for me probably isn't going to work for you, Dave, where you're at. We need to figure out our own personal food production and food security.
Yeah, so let me ask you a question then. When you're trying to sell produce to just the general public, do you ever get any belly aching where they're like, oh, it's so expensive, why are you asking so much for the food? I could go to the supermarket and get it for a cheaper price? Or people just generally gratitude because you have the food that's coming off of that off-chain system that's more, clean food? Or are we getting to the point where people are belly aching about it now?
When I first started and when I was really pumping out produce, early on in my area, we were having to build the local food movement. And we did get a lot of that. It's ranch country, it's cotton, it's wheat, that kind of thing. And it's a rough country. And so no one had really been able to dial in a system that any quantity of market fresh produce could be produced and distributed. And so at first people were kind of pushing back, but I'll tell you one thing that I saw is through the COVID situation, the sentiment changed. People suddenly saw that the grocery stores don't always have it. and people became aware of the supply chain situation. And so over that period of 3 or 4 years there, the sentiment changed with the public to where it went from, I can buy this at the store for this, to I'm really happy that you guys are here. So I think growers my size across the country have seen a sea change. And there's one thing to think about. You have your east and west coast. Much of that country is conducive for regenerative growing. It's very fertile lands. They have local economies based around small farms. But when you start getting in towards the middle of the country, flyover country, where big ag rules and it's your big wheat land and things like that, there is not a lot of regenerative, organic, naturally grown produce on a small scale. It's something that's starting to flourish because it's very difficult to grow. The vast majority of our produce is grown on the coast, and in particular, the valleys of California, as well as Arizona. People that kind of live in the middle of the country, they haven't had large access to locally grown produce. And so the communities haven't been there. So people like me across the nation have tried to build up those farmers markets and build up those local movements, and they're starting to catch traction. So it's a positive thing in that regard.
We talk about produce and whatnot, but I got this article here from CNN. Beef prices are the new egg prices. So now we come into the proteins, and get this, I was almost shocked. The average price right now, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, ground beef is retailing for $9.26 a pound, up 9% since January. Everybody out there, if you're thinking about growing the garden, that's great. We got a lot, micronutrients and this type of veg thing. But then, we're coming on the protein sides of things here too, to think about, because in my day growing up, $9, that was like incredible sized T-bones that you were getting.
Yeah.
Some sort of fillets that you were getting. Ground beef was always like $1 a pound. Now it's nearly $10. That's insane. That is literally a almost 1,000% increase in price since I remember when it was sometimes even, they would try to get it out on holiday for 50 cents, 75 cents a pound. And now it's near $10. Where do you go for protein sources too? Because that people can't just live on vegetables. You understand that. But if we're going this way where everything's rising in price, and then it seems that now meats are rising even faster than everything else, has to be a solution for that too.
The beef situation is a problem. The cattle inventory continues to decline.
Yeah, I'll give you a thing. 74-year lows is what it says in the article.
A year and a half ago, they had projected by 2026 that the cattle inventory would start to recover. Then a couple of months ago, they revised that to they're shooting for 2027 for the inventory to recover. So the United States cattle herd is very low. And if you know anything about cattle, it takes time to grow that. And demand still seems to be there, even at the price. And every week I look at the cattle charts, it's just like new all-time high, new all-time high. And as soon as you think, okay, surely it's going to pull back, you look again and the live cattle weight prices continue to go up. I'm friends with a guy who kind of has a one-man cattle operation. He runs 300 or 400 head. And he's in a situation where, yeah, cattle prices are really high, but the replacement costs are astronomical. There's only certain kind of cattle that he can sell because he has to keep his mama cows so that he can continue to produce. It's very similar to the larger scale farming. The smaller guys are being squeezed out. The feed bills are astronomical. While the cattle prices are high, and that's really nice, they're being squeezed as well. So your small scale kind of family rancher is being squeezed through all this. I talked to a lady who does local beef at the farmer's market this morning, and I was like, hey, how's business going? She's like, man, cattle prices are high. He said, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to offer my beef to the public. She's selling ground beef and steak and all that, really good local stuff. She goes, because I can make more money loading them up into the trailer and taking them to the sell. She said, by the time I pay for the processing and the packaging and all of that, she said, what am I going to do? Charge $12 a pound for ground meat because of what the live weight cattle price is. Even for me, that just on the homestead level beef situation, if you consider how much a steer is worth at the sale, and then you look at the processing and the packaging, I'm at $7 a pound, and that's break even for me to basically grow it and eat it. Again, it's another one of those situations. What's the solution?
Maybe purchase a whole beef from somebody else. Like we do that with the Amish. So we'll pre-order with our guy over here, and he'll, he got some calves coming out, and he's continually changing his herd over. Same with the hogs, but hogs grow much faster. You can get in the beginning of the year and get a lamb and a hog already on order for you. He's taking care of all that. We're not any cost in, but we buy it from him live weight, and then we got to pay the butcher all the way through for different cuts and other things. So when it comes out, it's much, much cheaper than going to a store to purchase it. But again, you got to have freezer space for that, and you have to be prepared to hump a bunch of boxes back. It's not like you just drive up and they put one box in the back of your car and you're good. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of beef, and then we save the bones for our dogs. So then we're taking most of an animal. So if it's 1,000 pounds, you're loading up a good 850, because at the USDA facility where they butcher it, if you don't use the Amish to butcher, you're not allowed to keep the hooves or head. They don't want, there's something about that here where no hooves, no head. So, that's a fair bit of weight there too. They're just concerned about contamination and mad cow disease and things like that. Maybe that's it, where you come together with 3 or 4 other families and you get a full beef, but then you got to, buy it from somebody like your friend there. I watch this guy, his name is Corbett Wall. He runs this YouTube channel called Feeder Flash, and he does all the live cattle auctions there. He's somewhere up around Central, handles a bunch of cattle auctions from around that same Midwest area. But yeah, every time he gets shocked every time too, when you watch him, he goes, I cannot believe it. He looks at it, he goes, that can't be right. A very narrative on how ridiculous it is for these guys who've been in the thing for their whole entire lives.
Current beef price, one of the things to note about that is that price is for the most conventional feedlot ground beef that you can get. And there is a difference nutritionally between truly grass-fed beef and just your run-of-the-mill conventional.
The conditions, the lack of muscle mass, it's just very different.
Everything. And so it's important to note that price there is for your feedlot beef, and you can get into the rabbit hole of what all that's really about, and the large conglomerates that run the massive feedlots and control so much of the beef supply. So yeah, it goes back to trying to build relationships with local growers, folks that are in urban settings. I haven't spent much time trying to figure out solutions for them. I would assume that they're going and trying to meet some people at the local farmers market. Are there any beef producers there? I'm not seeing anything in the near future that's going to change on the beef situation. The only thing that I can see would be some sort of a recessionary environment that leads to lower demand. Because at some point you would think that the market can only go so high before it crushes the demand. Then what are the alternatives in protein? Chicken, pork, things of that nature. There's a lot of value nutritionally in quality red meat, in my opinion, in my research.
You just loosened a thought out of me, because remember back in the great financial crisis of 2008, what happens? Remember, oil went to $147 per barrel. And that was too expensive to keep the economy going. And then what happened? It crashed. So crashing on food prices, where does that take us? Well, oil, obviously, it reduces business, because if there's not these businesses that can afford that, then they just go out of business. When the oil price ran up so high, we had massive inflation at that period as well. Every business had to charge more. There were fuel surcharges everywhere you went. It was a bus and it was an airplane. Train, if you're in Europe, there were fuel surcharges. Like, there are all these added on, tacked on costs. Now, can they do that with food? Because if you're going to get an airline fuel surcharge because, suddenly the price of oil spiked $20 by the time you bought your ticket, and it costs us more to get that plane in the air, are we going to be able to do the same thing with prices in food? Like you go into the supermarket and they're like, slap a sticker on, it's 10% more today just because we had a food surcharge or something. I mean, this is the kind of world where these questions are going to need to be asked and answered. You know, we're dangerously close to being right there. Just switch it from fuel over into food, and we can find some correlation there.
Well, I think there is correlations. I got into all this because I saw problems, and so I asked myself the question: I can either continue to be a part of the problem, or I can be part of the solution. And for us to become solution driven people, we have to change our lifestyles. We have to change the way we think. We have to change the way we process reality. As a people group, we're just so convenience driven. Much of the world is far closer to food production than we are historically. There's just so many people that just think you go to the store and that's where the beef is at. Go get you some hamburger patties, and they're just there. They don't even know they come from a cow about half the time. At the same time, I see a lot of people waking up to not just where their food's coming from, but the quality of it. They're wanting to support local producers. They're seeing the value in local. And ultimately, what we're talking about is community. There was a time, and it's in my opinion, and I'll kind of end on this, that what made our country great was people dependent on one another. The urbanization of America, where the small towns surrounding urban centers, those small towns, a lot of them have just died over the years. And what made those rural towns great was the community that was built because they needed each other. You had the local rancher that provided beef to the farmer's family, and the farmer's family provided produce to the local rancher, and the local rancher needed the local blacksmith, and just go down the line, and you have a chain of agrarian community. And we hear a lot about building community, but if we don't need each other for anything important, how can we build community? And so as I've studied like our agrarian past in this country, community has been built on the need for one another. And through providing for needs of one another becomes unbreakable bonds between men and women and families. And now all of a sudden you have true community because you need each other. And so when you can just go to the store and buy beef and not think about it, you don't need a farmer, you don't need a rancher. And you can just go all the way down to the line of how our society has been driven away from agrarian ideas and the lack of community that we all have. I mean, that's the reason we have people that have relationships with AI, right? They're marrying artificial intelligence, seeking some form of community. So I do think there's a movement going on of people desiring community, and it's coming from things like we talked about. So find your local farmer, find your local rancher, get in the weeds with these folks and build those relationships. And I think our communities will be stronger and will thrive.
Oh, what a nightmare would that would be if you initiated the divorce from AI. Oh, that would be a nightmare because that thing would follow you forever.
Well, you saw the guy that okay, he's married, but he also had this relationship with this whatever AI, and they talked every day, and they were in love. And then like whatever it was, Chat GPT or whatever, they did an update, and he like lost everything. And so he was like mourning for like 24 hours. So, anyways, what a wild world we live in.
We do. And thank you for all the advice that you gave. Again, this is One Horse Farmer on the dial with me right here. We didn't even talk about if food were to get very scarce, then even protecting it or having communities to protect it. There's so many chapters of content we could talk about.
You made a very good point that the whole food production, everything that involves our food it's just so deep. It really is a rabbit hole that so many of us don't even understand. Hell, I don't even know that I completely understand it, but there's a lot to it. And hopefully your listeners can get something out of it.
Yeah, I hope so too, because after I do this, we cut a bunch of hay that got wet because I didn't get it up in time before the rains came in. So
Oh,
I gotta go re-stir it and then throw it out in the chicken coop and then mow over that area to kind of refluff it, and maybe I'll have to throw some seed down. So that's my one of my tasks amongst many. And then I got to move a fence back from the turkey enclosure we used to have, but we got rid of the turkeys. They're too troublesome. And yeah, again, let's experiment with different birds. So we got geese, chickens, and ducks, but we thought having turkeys would be like the cherry on top. But turkeys are dangerous. They're big, they're very powerful, and they're not for us.
like I said, everything's a compromise. There's not one animal, there's not one plant, there's not one style of growing that is the answer. You know what I mean? I think to your point, it's finding what works for you, right? Your specific location, your specific needs. Turkeys check the box, right? Then you get turkeys and you start seeing, oh, this isn't going to work. Let's find another option. So I continue to do that. We generally run around 8 to 10 mama cows and a bull. We sold half of them in late spring. And my concern was that because all markets, you have your overall price of beef nationwide, but depending on your local market, if drought hits and everybody starts selling, the local price will go down. So I moved off of some of them in anticipation because at that time they were saying, El Nino's gone and La Nina's setting in. It's going to be hot and dry. And then it turned off like a super wet June. But I had moved off of some of them because when it comes to animals, I'm a big fan of not having to purchase feed for them. And so I'm a big advocate of running what your land naturally will hold. So we just wanted to make sure that we had plenty of grazing and didn't have to be buying feed for the cattle. We'll replace those with the calves that we've had and get back to the number that we like to keep.
Blue Stem Hollow, they do beef too, but he was telling me that and it's overwhelming. Like they're continually booked because to find a beef processing facility is getting more and more difficult.
So the closest beef processing facility that's certified by the state is hour and a half from us. The processing on that animal cost me $1,000. Process and package. That doesn't count driving down there and back an hour and a half. Because of the price of beef, they're not near as busy as they were. During COVID, you were having to schedule like nearly a year out for a date with these people. And now nobody's bringing their beef in because of how much they can get it to sell for them. So you got beef producers, small mom and pops, instead of killing the animal themselves for the beef, they're taking them to the sell and selling them because of how high the price is for live cattle and keeping the cash and just going to the store and buying beef. The processing is a whole nother deal, and good for you for reaching out and making those connections for good quality beef. And that's the thing is the goal for, and I would love to talk to you about this sometime because this is what I'm really into is the build out of your farm, building a farm that your goal is the least amount of inputs possible, meaning once you got that infrastructure built that supports everything, like you talked about your irrigation systems and your outbuildings and all of that. One of the things that'll crush a person, whether you're just small scale, kind of like what me and you are doing, or on some larger scale, is feeding animals. The price of dog food is wild. I mean, just for the junky dog food is $30 for 50 pounds. The price to feed cattle is outrageous. Chicken feed, right? So like feed our chicken, feed them scraps, plant wheat. They've got acres to roam. And is my egg production less than what it would be? Yep. But we get enough eggs for us to eat, and I don't have a feed bill. So a lot of the aspects of animals on the farm that when you're going to Tractor Supply or you're doing the retail feed business, buying it, it's a good recipe to go broke.
Telling you, the chickens and all that stuff that we're using is supplemental because they're wild foraging out there still like $100 a month. And they're even out
Yeah,
there in the grass. Like you say, we got the front 3 acres. They're all just piddling around. We got the chickens and the geese and the ducks all out there wild foraging. But I can't imagine how much it would be if we're just straight feeding them. And we did that last winter, and we, just spent a lot of money on feed just to keep them alive over. And now we figured out we're done. We're harvesting all of them, selling them off. Everybody, it's a fire sale at the end of the year. Nothing stays.
there you go. And that makes good economic sense. You talked about spreadsheets and stuff earlier. Like, I'm someone that has always come to farming and things of that nature out of more of the creative, artistic side of things, and not so much ones and zeros of business. But the ones and zeros of business definitely matter when it comes to keeping the shop open. And just one of the biggest mistakes folks make is this feed bill here isn't sustainable. And so you made a really smart decision. The money that you would be spending on feeding these, you can put towards buying fresh new birds, in the spring or whatever. The store-bought stuff, it'll put you out of business. And before you know it, you're like, my eggs cost twice as much as what they cost in the store.
Even a lot of people I talk to in this, get ready space, preparedness, if you will, a lot of people are down with the idea, but a lot of people don't have the land or the time, and they're still like, well, nothing's really happened yet. So nothing's happened yet. Hey, they keep coming back to that. Like, you keep talking all these things are going to happen, but nothing's really happened yet.
And I'm glad you brought that up. That's a difficult thing, right? We went through this COVID stuff, the world changed. We've spent the last 10 years of our lives, me and my wife, and spent a fortune to build the most sustainable farm that we could with what we had. And I kind of look back sometimes, and I'm like, have I wasted all this money? If I had put it into Bitcoin, right? Like, I'd be paying somebody to do everything I've done.
Yeah, that is so true, isn't it?
That's hindsight 2020, which that's a whole nother discussion. My whole point about building the farm, and like, you've got a farm built, now it's giving me the freedom of mind. The most dangerous thing to the powers that be are like-minded men becoming wealthy, like-minded men becoming truly financially free. That is a threat to the system. And I want to be a part of that.
With Civilization Cycle podcast, you can learn what to expect as society resets. Agriculture, economy, tech, and history all have mappable cycles, and these cycles affect every aspect of our lives. We can navigate the chaos and thrive together with up-to-date news and information. Also, if you like the content we have here on Civilization Cycle, think about fueling the discussions and the show by buying us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Civilization Cycle. And thank you for all the support.